I think it's time we talked about Henry. Hello and welcome to RotD Review of the Day, and today it is Mike's Manic Monday. It is my pick, a movie from the ether that doesn't necessarily fall into the categories of the other days. This is the potpourri day, and today I have selected for review the 1989 low-budget, terribly visceral movie, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. This is a movie that I had seen once before, and I didn't quite have the impact that I did on this most recent viewing of yesterday. The first time that I watched it was incorporated into a 24-hour marathon, and although I love those for getting together with friends kind of thing, I think that I am going to be a little bit more selective about what films I choose to have on them, just because movies such as this tend to get watered down when thrown into a mix and introduced to sleep deprivation and so on. And this is one that really required a bit of thought and some paying attention and just really being able to absorb the feel of it. And I definitely got a lot more from it on this most recent viewing. This is a movie that was rated X when it first came out, and I can kind of see why, considering that at that time there was no NC-17 rating. This would definitely bypass the hard R rating without actually being pornography. So this is really just a brutal, visceral, fingernails and the bloody grit glimpse into the mind of a killer without a whole lot of purpose. And in doing so, it really has a dramatic, profound impact as a film. And to get into more details than that, let's get into the categories. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And the plot of this one, I gave a 20 out of 25. This followed the character of Henry, played by Michael Rooker. And he is just a guy that is getting along. He's living his life. He's working odd jobs. He lives in a small apartment with a roommate of Otis, played by Tom Tolles. And Otis's sister comes by to live with them for a short while. She's separating from her husband and needs a place to stay. And the thing about Henry, as you might infer from the title of the film, he is a killer. I don't know necessarily about serial killer, because the strict definition of that, I don't know if he really meets the criteria on. He purposefully avoids patterns as opposed to being kind of directed by patterns. He's fairly free and loose about the choices that he makes as far as victims. And any clear purpose behind it. This is very emotionless, purposeless. I'm sure that psychiatrists would have a field day with him trying to get to the underlying what is he actually trying to do, but the movie doesn't explore that a whole lot. Instead, we are just following him around for the most part as he interacts with Otis and Otis's sister, Becky. And Otis gets introduced to the killer side of Henry. He knew that he was a violent, dangerous man. He met him in prison for the first time, and then once they both wound up getting out in staggering time escapes, they wound up living together. So he knows that Henry is a dangerous man and a killer, but he doesn't know to what degree. And when he gets introduced to that, Otis provides a counterbalance to the purposelessness of the killing aspect of the movie by actually reveling in it and taking some glee and some free and loose giddiness to it that ultimately starts to become a bit compromising. And the movie goes from there. I'm not going to get into any more in terms of plot and spoilers. You'll have to watch it if you want more information on that. But the thing that I really want to discuss is what makes this movie so brutal. Because it's not the killings themselves as far as like the effects go. And so, this is 1989. We are fully ingrained in the Freddy and Jason disemboweling era here. There's really not a whole lot that this movie does in terms of special effects and blood and gore and the types of killings that they are that really stand out. So what is it about this movie that makes it so harsh, makes it so sledgehammer home. And I really think that ultimately it's because it does treat it with a sense of disconnected emotionlessness. And cinematic art can be it can be presented in just innumerable ways. And oftentimes we just see a very direct, straight line narrative. It's showing us the story as it's unfolding until the end credits are in, and then that was our story. But there are movies out there that tend to use the cinematic, artistic, visual presentation medium to create an emotional state. And in this case, in Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, what it does is it takes the same stance as Henry of not being extravagant, of not having loud, obnoxious, brash noises and say, look how brutal we are, take glee in it, take giddiness in it, bathe in it, and, odd camera angles and all sorts of intestines flying everywhere. It really doesn't do that. It stays feet on the ground, simple, and this is simply just happening. And the slashes and the gurgles and so on, it really comes through a lot more. Somehow, by pulling back and having the film's emotional tone match Henry's, it makes it so much more brutal and visceral. And I think that's really what makes this film stand out amongst all of its peers and brethren, by having a killer that you could so easily just meet in ordinary life and not realize who they were, not realize that, perhaps on a random lottery drawing going on inside their head, that you were one of the lucky ones that simply poured their coffee and then they left, that they're not going to follow you and murder you in brutal fashion just because. And it could have gone that way. So there's a sense of real terror behind this, that this is a simple, everyman situation. You don't necessarily have to find a puzzle box and solve the lament configuration to have terrible things happen to you. You could simply just accidentally bump into somebody on the street and have that person be somebody like Henry. The Intent, I gave a 22 out of 25 for all the reasons that I mentioned before. This is shocking. This is disturbing. This is can't take your eyes off of it. Interesting, even by today's standards. And I think that really says something, that you can have this level of gritty brutality in 1989 that still holds up today. And today, we're getting into the, we are well past getting into the dirty toilet torture porn kind of movies. They've had their run, and we still seem to be kind of stuck into it, albeit the kind of the tail end of the fad. What makes this, this still holds up. And again, the emotional tone of the film, it doesn't revel in the brutality. It just is. And by doing so, it makes it so much more real and frightening as a result. Yes, it has, it doesn't quite have the, kind of factor when you see somebody's, toenail ripped off, in super close-up shot with, strands of stuff and so forth. It doesn't have that element to it, but it gets you on a much deeper, much harsher gut punch level. The acting, I gave a 23 out of 25. This was phenomenal performances all around. This was the first film by Michael Rooker, who plays the titular character of Henry, and he did such an amazing job of playing this so low-key. He had a lot going on in the background. Apparently, he stayed in character on and off camera. He really, really committed to this role, and it sold it so well. There were elements of this where you could not tell where he was coming from. You could not tell when he was lying, or if he was lying. There was a conversation that he had with Becky about him talking about the circumstances in which he killed his mother in the past, and that's why he wound up in jail. And within the story that he told, within that 2-3 minute long story, he had conflicting information. And, oh, right, I forgot. Yes, it was that. And, is he lying? Was he lying before? Did he actually simply have a lapse of memory there? And he sold it so well that he was messing with people on a level that he was way beyond them, and it showed. But at the same time, he took no revelry in it. He knew how to play it smart. I really, really loved Michael Rooker's performance in this, but I can't really go through this review without also giving a big tip of my hat to Tracy Arnold, who played Becky, which was just doe-eyed and innocent. Just a wonderful counterbalance to the Henry character. But especially a counterbalance to the Otis character played by Tom Tolles. The Otis character was done so well in matching the actions of Henry while taking a completely different emotional stance on it. And the best way I can really put it is the Otis character was the other slasher films of the 80s. The person that took delight in showing, wow, look at the killings that I'm doing. And in doing so showed how juvenile that can be and irresponsible that can be. I mean, not that killing is a responsible action, but it really provided that yin to Henry's yang of showing the two sides of exactly the same coin, and how it got the audience more on board with Henry's emotional state and Henry's methodology to have the Otis character highlight how ridiculous this can be. The technical, I gave a 21 out of 25. This was 16 millimeter, low budget, filmed through the lens of necessity more than excess. They didn't have a whole lot to work with, so what they did within the confines of what they were restricted to. And they pulled it off very well. The blood and gore effects that they did have were very, very good, especially considering the era, 1989, we were starting to see some really good practical effects and so forth come across, and the fact that they were able to hop onto that and really show some good stuff here was very convincing and very brutal. I really, really liked it. I have to say that the medium and the circumstances in which they were forced to tell the story, it was perfect for setting the tone that they were going for. If they had filmed on 35 millimeter, if they had a big budget, it would have seemed really out of place, and I think the film would have had nowhere near the impact that it did. So this was just a perfect blend of the technical circumstances meeting up with the story that they were trying to tell. And as far as behind the scenes, the directing and the editing and so forth, the editing in particular, I really liked. The first cut of this one was apparently almost 2.5 hours long, and it now clocks in at a fairly short hour and 20 minutes. And honestly, it feels just right. Even at an hour and 20 minutes, there was a dense amount of material that still took its time. It was a really fascinating thing to watch in terms of how much they were able to pack in while never seeming rushed, and the fact that it did still wind up being an hour and 20 minutes long. I think that's a testament to the editing there. And so that gives us a total score of 86 out of 100 points. I would absolutely recommend this movie, but I would also caution folks, this is not the kind of movie that has some really terrible imagery and was a roller coaster ride of fun, Eli Roth kind of thing, where the end credits roll and, well, that happened and that was a fun little roller coaster, moving on with our day. This is a movie that sticks with you a bit, and it is a disturbing, difficult watch, but it is still a fantastic film, a fantastic horror movie, and absolutely worth a watch. I would say that this is almost required viewing for any horror movie fan. So that should about do it. That's my review of Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. I really thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you like these videos, please click like and subscribe. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.